Welcome back. In this lecture, I'd like to look at analyzing an argument. And at the end of this lecture, you will be ready to go ahead and start that worksheet and writing activity for today's classwork / the homework. The worksheet was originally scheduled as homework, so that'll be hopefully not too hard. I tried to make this a fairly light day since you just finished a paper. But you'll have some brain work. You'll go watch a video. So anyway, let's go ahead and start with analyzing an argument. So the first thing I want you guys to think about is you're looking at an argument, and this can be something that's really overtly persuasive, or it can be something that's not so overtly persuasive. But keep in mind that most academic essays will have some kind of claim, some kind of argument going on in them. So your first kind of claim is a claim of fact. It just asserts that something exists. So it is the case that law. Those are pretty straightforward. They tend to read a lot like, they often read a lot like research reports. I have to say that because sometimes you'll get one where people don't necessarily agree that the thing exists. So it may be that people have to take some time to just prove that the thing is actually a fact. The next claim is claim of value, and that really does an evaluation. I think of claims of value also as kind of a moral claim. People might say this exists and it's good. This exists and it's bad or it's wrong, right? Policy is a call for change. This was if you did a proposal essay in your last English class, you were making a claim of policy there. We should do this. This should change. This should not happen. This is how we can fix it. So your claim of policy really has an action that it's looking for. So let's go through and look at these claims in terms of racial profiling. I have a class looking at racial profiling right now, so it's on my mind. So the first thing would be a claim of fact. That kind of argument would really look at whether or not police actually use race to make a determination about whether they want to stop people, whether they want to observe people. So that really looks at, is it a thing that actually exists? You may then have claims of value. It may be that people are saying, racial profiling is not something that we want to see happening in our country. It's not just. You might see an opposing viewpoint saying something like, well, racial profiling helps the police do their job, so it's okay. However you look at it, whatever kind of argument you're seeing, there's a value attached, right? Either it's a thing we don't want, or it's a thing that people think confers value. So that's really your claim of value. A claim of policy then will call for a change. So if you're doing a claim of policy, it's probably going to be a lot of the kinds of stuff we've seen around racial profiling. Let's train officers not to use these criteria. Let's work on social change. Let's put a policy in place that will try to prevent this, right? Some kind of a change that involves people taking action. So those are your types of claims. The next thing is looking at the support for a claim. This will look very familiar to you. We do this in evaluating sources for your own research as well. So this is the other side of that. You know how you evaluate your sources as you look at what you're going to use in your papers. Now you're looking at what other people have done in their research. So, are the sources that were used recent? How have things changed? Are the sources that they've used relevant? Does the evidence being presented have real bearing on the claim? Is it a reliable source? Do you know, can you easily find out who these people are? Does the author talk to you about that? Is the source accurate? So, do we have good data going? Do we know anything about the way that data has been gathered and interpreted? This might also apply to evaluating the way that the author has used their sources. So, have they used their sources in a way that gives you confidence? As you start building your information, do you see the same kinds of numbers, or is there a question about what's going on? All right. The next piece is concessions and counterarguments. I don't think we've had the chance yet to do a Tolman analysis, and I will probably do that with you guys. Just make sure you've seen it. Some of you may have already seen this in 121. But one thing to remember, and one thing that I think most of you have probably heard in writing persuasive pieces in 121, is that you need to think about the counterarguments in a conversation. So what might a reasonable person say to object to the perspective? Once you've got that, you can then refute that, right? Now, another thing you can look at in the conversation and kind of analyzing that argument is concessions. So are there points that your author, or that you as an author, are willing to grant the opposing viewpoint even if you don't agree with them? So could we say something like, gee, I agree with you. I know, this is totally like being in class. Could we say, let's go back to racial profiling. Gee, I agree with you that there may be times when the police can use generalized characteristics to more quickly find suspects. So we'll agree there, but then can we also agree that as a practice generally this is not acceptable, right? So then you'd have those two perspectives coming together more. Okay, so we've got that. You guys have a worksheet to do for class. You're analyzing an argument worksheet. You'll be using a TED Talk. This can be any TED Talk that makes an argument, which means I mostly don't want to see things like the music things that are done, some of the more performative piece kinds of things, unless you can find the argument there. So almost any TED Talk will do. Identify the type of claim in your talk. Is it a claim of fact, a claim of value, a claim of policy? You'll analyze the reasons used to support the claim. So what do you know about the information that's being presented to you? Identify any concessions and identify any counterarguments. So this is really a first step in getting into joining a conversation, but I think it's one that's really worth looking back at and reviewing and kind of thinking through. Okay, that's the end of today's lecture. Definitely email me if you have questions. Go forth and be epic.